This is my translation of Domenico Losurdo's Antonio Gramsci, From Liberalism to Critical Communism. Between the Risorgimento and the First World War, Gramsci's Beginnings. Section 1. The Encounter with Croce and Gentile. When the First World War breaks out, a turning point in the history of the 20th century, Gramsci is 23 years old. Despite being affiliated with the Socialist Party, this isn't known with certainty, he doesn't engage in political activity with particular intensity. This provincial from Sardinia distinguished himself from all who were or were destined to be distinguished leaders of the international workers' movement by not having the baggage of the political and theoretical debates of the Second Internationale. What is clear is his link with the underclasses, forged by his modest social origins, the painful experience of daily deprivations, and a sensitivity and a moral seriousness that encourage identification with those who suffer a life of hardship. Hardships which are in no short supply in Sardinia, where, in addition to illiteracy, malaria, trachoma, tuberculosis, and hunger are raging. That said, Gramsci's identification with the underclasses and peoples is not limited, of course, to his island of origin. His schoolwork reveals his plain solidarity with those wretched peoples of the colonies, branded as barbaric and uncivilized, and treated as such by the periodic crusades of all Europe. But on the cultural plane, those who arouse the Sardinian students' attention are, above all, Croce and Salvemini. When he enrolls in the University of Turin, a city which is on the verge of becoming the center of the worker and socialist movement, the young Gramsci remains in contact with liberal professors, Luigi Einaudi, Francesco Ruffini, Gio Solari, that in some cases are deeply influenced by the influence of the liberal philosopher Benedetto Croce. Salvemini himself is one of those who awoke the interest of the young Sardinian. Though he expressed some sympathy for the proletarian movement, he is engaged in a fundamentally liberal battle against protectionism and all forms of state interventionism. On the theoretical plane, he considers himself a disciple of Smith, much more so than Marx. On the other hand, in the Gramsci of these years, references to Labriola, explicit or implied, are few and far in between. All the testimonies coincide in pointing out the influence of Croce and later Gentile in the Sardinian scholar. But nothing could be more wrong than to reduce this influence to an academic matter or an abstractly cultural one. The encounter with these two philosophers is not a starting point from which we can deduce, with the variables of the situation, the subsequent evolution of Gramsci's thought. This encounter is already a result, in the sense that it constitutes a first answer to a problem that is not academic, since it relates to real social and political struggles. Gramsci relates Croce and Gentile with the Italy of the Risorgimento. The critics are the clericalist circles, that, in the Sardinia and the Italy of the time, exercise a nefarious influence with the fear that they instill into all social change, presented in advance as a dangerous leap into the void. Hegel is the black beast of these circles, which, together with his philosophy, intends to reject all of modernity. But in the struggle between the syllabus of errors and Hegel, the winner is Hegel. It's not only the victory of one philosopher, but of a historical process, in a real historic world that has found its theoretical expression in the German thinker system. It is the victory of a process which, starting from the Reformation, presupposes the destruction of feudalism and the ancient regime, the advance of secularization, with the good old God who returns to the realm of the larvas, and the appearance of the modern individual, who chooses free examination and pure philosophy without the hindrance of an outside authority. It is above all the victory of historical consciousness, which in the given situation refuses to see and accept an unchanging nature. The stance in favor of Hegel and of Croce and Gentile is then a stance in favor of modernity and, in the case of Italy, in favor of the Risorgimento, which has torn down the Asian regime, has created a modern national state, and has defeated a state of the church that is clearly pre-modern. Suffice it to recall the temporal power of the Pope, the confessional character of the institutions, and the ghetto for the Jews. Same as the encounter with Croce and Gentile, the antithesis, Hegel's syllabus, isn't just of a speculative origin. In the papal document, the condemnation of freedom of consciousness and expression, of legal equality with the suppression of the ecclesiastical jurisdiction, of compulsory education and public school, the condemnation, in one word, of the world and the freedom of the moderns, runs in parallel with the denunciation of the notion of the state as the origin of the source of all rights. The syllabus of errors does not cite names, but several years later, Cardinal Kettler takes care of clearing up all doubts. Quote, "For several years now, liberalism screams out to us, everything by the people's work. Hegel tells us, the people, like the state, is the absolute power on earth. With this maxim, they've fought the authority that comes from God, and they've mocked our formula, everything by the grace of God." End quote. The eminent man of the church continues, quote, "Liberalism turns the state into a God on earth, in the sense that there is no divine and eternal law over the law of the state." End quote. Antonio Rosmini argued in the same vein, even before the syllabus of errors, that modern anthropolitics, which finds its most complete expression in Hegel, leads to state idolatry, with the intention of modifying the political and social order according to the will of man. The Hegel from which Gramsci draws is the Hegel conservatives detest for being liberal and modern, for being the expression of historical consciousness, of the possibility of change, and the transformative initiative of the human subject. His philosophy had an important role in the ideological preparation of the Revolution of '48. This is also the context in which to place the references to Gramsci and Gentile, Italian disciples of the German philosopher and staunch defenders of the Risorgimento. But this explains the problematic character of the relationship that Gramsci establishes from the beginning with the two great secular intellectuals. He gives them credit, in a manner of speaking, sub conditione. The reading of their text seeks an answer, or materials for an answer, to a real problem, and the value of that answer will be continually measured by how much it brings to the comprehension and solution of real problems. It should come as no surprise, then, that in his subsequent evolution, Gramsci no longer sees the two great neo-idealist intellectuals as paladins of modernity, but as accomplices of the anti-modern obscurantism of Pius X, which defend the social order and don't condemn the influence of the most reactionary clerical culture over the popular masses. On the other hand, his judgment of Catholic culture is always historic and politically concrete. A significant testimony recounts that a young Gramsci critiqued already the stupid anti-clericalism of those who don't understand the clear superiority of the pacifism inspired by the gospel over the interventionism of some declared atheists. Coming back to the two neo-idealist philosophers, Gramsci sees them as the theoretical expression of the Risorgimento and a bourgeois revolution to be carried out, and even according to a vision that matures little by little, to complete and overcome. Gramsci and Gentile are subjected, therefore, to an interpretation in which they would not recognize themselves. That is to say, he presents this close relationship in such a way that, in the eyes of the two authors interpreted by him, would only be the confirmation of a reciprocal and radical disagreement.